Hey guys, Teeka's Dragon here, and today I will be playing Chatterfang Squirrel General versus my opponent with Sythis Harvest hand. So this is two new commanders from Modern Horizons 2. It's really fun games coming up here, so it's best of 3. Hope you enjoy. We're going to roll to see who goes first. That's a strong 11, and then I'm there with a pitiful 5, so my opponent chooses to go first. So my opponent starts off his turn 1 with a snow-covered plains, and then into the new broken card Esper Sentinel there, and then he passes turn. So I draw. So firstly I play my land for turn, so the snow-covered swamp, and then I play a Mox Diamond. So I will pay the 1 for the Esper Sentinel, and then for the Mox Diamond I'm discarding a snow-covered forest. Then with the Mox Diamond I play a Ravenous Squirrel and I pass the turn. So my opponent untaps, draws for turn, and then he plays his land for turn, which is a Savannah. So he taps them both, plays this, and then he passes the turn. I then untap, draw for turn, play my land for turn, which is a Buying. And then with the 3 mana, I decide that I'm going to play my commander as well. So we get out Chatterfang, and then we pass the turn. Opponent untaps, draws for turn. He taps the Savannah, and then he plays a Wild Growth onto the snow-covered plains. Trigger, gains 1 life, draws a card. My opponent then plays its land for turn, so it's a Windswept Heath. So he decides to sack that, pays the life, and then searches for a Temple Garden. He then shuffles his library, I cut that for him, and he uses 3 mana and plays a Satire Enchanter. My opponent then passes the turn, I untap, draw, have a look at what we've got in the hand. So I decide to swing with Chatterfang. It's got Forest Walk, so it can't be blocked, so that damage goes straight through. So I then pass the turn, my opponent untaps, draws for turn. He then plays a Messer Enchantress, tapping the 3 mana there. Next he plays a Miri's Guile, so trigger, draw 3, gain 1 life. He then plays his land for turn, which is a snow-covered forest, and then he taps that, plays a Utopia Sprawl, enchanting it onto the snow-covered plains that already has the wild growth. So trigger, draw 3, gain 1 life. He then, because why not, puts down a Jeweled Lotus, lowering his hand because he will have to discard at this point. He does pass turn, but in his end step I flash in an opposition agent, and then it's my turn. So untap, draw. So I pay the 3 mana, 2 and the 1, and play an Arcane Signet. I then use the Arcane Signet to play a Birds of Paradise. With that I swing with a Chatterfang, get in for the 3 damage again, and then pass the turn. So my opponent, he untaps, he draws for turn. He then taps for 3 mana, moves his lands out of the way, and plays a Monologue Tax. So trigger, draw 3, gain a life. So my opponent plays his land for turn, which is a Serra's Sanctum, which is a crazy good card. He then plays a land tax, so trigger, draw 3, gain a life. He then taps the Serra's Sanctum for 6 floating white mana, and with this he plays a Starfield Mystic. So he's got 1 left over from the Serra's Sanctum, and enchantments cost 1 less, so he pays 1 to get an Enchantress's Presence out. And again, trigger, draw 3, gain 1. So then he chucks down a mana crypt. He then pays 1, plays a destiny spinner. Again, trigger, 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 draw 4, gain 1. And because his board's not big enough, he then plays another enchantment. This is Grasp of Fate. So trigger, 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 gain 1, and then he targets Chatterfang. It is then his end step, and he starts discarding, discards 8 cards in total, and passes turn. So it's my turn. I untap, and then I draw for turn. So spend a while thinking, and eventually I play a 3 visits, search for forest. Did I pay the 1? No. He can draw a card. So we get an Overgrown Tomb. We pay the 2 life for it to enter untapped. And then we pay 4 and we play a Damnation. Do, do, do. So all the creatures die. So my opponent untaps. He completely rearranges his board. And then he finally remembers his Mirri's Guile trigger, looks at the top 3, puts them back in any order, and then draws for turn. He has seemed to miss of his artifacts, so he didn't do the mana crypt trigger, and now he's remembered he's got his Jeweled Lotus, so he just needs to pay 1 to get out Sythis, his commander. Next he taps the plains for white, green, green, and then he plays with it a Verduran Enchantress. So next he taps the 1, and then he plays himself an Exploration. So trigger, 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 draw 3, gain 1. So he then goes ahead and taps another land. This time he's playing a Burgeoning. Again, trigger, 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 draw 3, gain 1. Plays a land for turn, so a Snow-Covered Forest. He then plays down a Chrome Mox, and with that he exiles a Root Me, so that can now tap for green. So he's tapping the Serra's Sanctum again. This time it's for 9 white mana. With this, he firstly plays a Smothering Tithe, leaving him with 5 floating white mana. So he's just going to move his treasures into shot. I just reminded him that it's not in shot. So he puts the 2 treasure cards together there. It's still not really in shot, but his board's running out of space. Next he plays a Sterling Grove, so he needs to play 1 green, and then he uses 1 floating, so now he's down to 4 floating mana. All the triggers, draw 3, gain 1. And then next he throws out an Arthurian Enchantress. And if things couldn't get any worse for me, he then throws out a Tranith Magistrate, which means I'm not casting my commander again. It just gets even worse. So with a Chrome Mox he taps. He then plays a Sylvan Library. So this will trigger 4 times, so draw 4 cards, gain a life. We then get into his end step. He discards 3 cards down to a hand size of 7. Then it's finally my turn again. So we untap. We draw. We look at how empty our board is compared to that board. We look at the hand. I'll assure you, there is nothing in my hand that is playable. But we go along with it anyway, and we play a land for turn. So we play a Burning Catacombs. We then tap 5 mana, and we cast a Deep Forest Hermit, getting us 4 squirrels. With nothing else to play, I then pass the turn. So my opponent untaps, he draws for turn, he plays his land for turn, which is a command tower. He then taps Sarah's Sanctum for a lot of white mana and then plays an Idyllic Tutor, at which point I scoop. So that is the end of that video, guys. That is game 1 of 3 games. Stick around, subscribe if you want to see game 2 and 3. See who wins in this overall. I assure you, Chatterfang comes out and he proves himself. So that's that. Thank you guys. Like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, let me know how broken you think Sythis is, and I'll see you at a later date.